Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, today we are going to discuss contemporary sociological theory, and a very important theory in contemporary sociological theory is the conflict theory, which explains the conflict in society scientifically, what are the causes and concerns, and we will try also to understand who are the theorists who has contributed in conflict theory and how conflict theory explains the different kind of society in a different manner. So, and for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Manoj Jena. He teaches sociology in Jamia Millia Islamia University and has published 2 textbooks and a number of papers published in the different referred and non-referred journals. And his area of specialization in technological studies and media studies. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this topic and give insight about conflict theory. So on your behalf, welcome him for the EduSet lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Amrendraji, for your kind word, and it's an immense pleasure for me to be here again. So, as he has already talked about that, we are going to discuss about the conflict theory in particular. So, as all of us we are aware about this particular fact is that the conflict theory has got a special position in the sociological theory in particular and social science in general. Many sociologists and all the social scientists, they have also used conflict theory to understand the social relations and the social dynamics in the society. So now let's talk about understanding the conflict theory. What do we mean by conflict theory? And primarily, when we are talking about conflict theory, the conflict theory seeks to scientifically explain the general contours of the conflict in the society. So how conflict starts and varies and affects in our social relationships, in our social positions, and so on and so forth. And the central concern for the conflict theory are the unequal distribution of scarcity, resources, and power. So power is a dynamic factor within the conflict theory studies, and scarcity of resources and goods and how they are interrelated with each other, which way we are utilizing the resources, who are the people they are utilizing the resources, who are the people they are controlling the society, and which way we are controlling the society. These are very, very important for us.
Okay. So, continue, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Then I was talking about what these resources might be different for each theorist. Primarily, in this lecture, we are going to discuss about different theorists and different theoretical positions. Which way they have analyzed it, like the Dahrendorf, Collin, and Coser. Primarily, we will discuss about Dahrendorf, Collin, and Coser's work. And even if when we're talking about different theorists, all of them, they have also influenced by the Weberian idea of class, status, and power, which is the most important and dynamic element for them. And primarily, all these conflict theorists generally see power as the central feature of a society, rather than thinking of the society as held together by the collective agreement concerning a cohesive set of cultural standards as functionalists do. So therefore, they have some sort of different take from the functionalist point of view, and they are arguing, they are very much concerned about that this dynamic relationship, who are controlling the power, who are not, so and so forth. And therefore, they argues that where power is located and who used it and who doesn't are thus fundamental to the conflict theory. So that means the power relationship is matter alert for the conflict theorist. Who are the people they are controlling the power, who are the people they are out of it. So in this way of thinking about things, power is not necessarily bad. It is a primary factor that guiding society and social relations. As you know that the power is an important and primary factor which is guiding society and social relations. So now let's talk about the basic sources of conflict. So in the definition of the conflict theory, most social conflict based on the unequal distribution of scarcity resources. So that means it's in the kind of, we fail to distribute the resources, or we have to understand which are the resources as distributed among all the citizens of the of a particular country. So there one can also analyze the idea of the social conflict. So therefore, Weber identifies those resources for us as class, status and power. So we can see the class, one hand, status and power. This is the three important element. So Weber as well as Zimmel also pointed out the importance of the cross-cutting influences that originate with the different structures of inequality. So here they are also talking about the idea of the inequality. For example, for instance, a working class black person may not share the same political interests as a working class white person. The different status positions of these two people may cut across their similar class interest. Again, thus what becomes important as a source of social conflict is the covariance of these three systems of stratifications. So these are the class, status and the power. One can say it's the three systems of stratification. If the public perceives that the same group controls the access to all three resources, it is likely that the legitimacy of the system will be questioned, because people perceive that the social mobility is hampered. So that means in a sense that some of them they are controlling these particular resources, and some of them they are out of it. And the other general source for conflict comes from the Karl Marx. The Marx concern was in the group's sense of deprivation caused by class. So he is talking about the idea of the deprivation, which you are deprived from from some sort of decision making activities, or you are deprived from the part of the political processes and so on and so forth. This sense of deprivation is what leads a group to class consciousness and produces conflict and social change. So that means deprivation would be an important dominant determinant which will initiate some sort of conflict, and it will create some sort of class consciousness, and it will bring some sort of social change within the social structure. The Marx was primarily concerned with explaining the structural changes or processes that would bring the working class to this realization, such thing as rising the level of education and working concentration that are both structurally demanded by the capitalism. So that Marx is also very much critical. One hand is also critical about the capitalism, and he is arguing about the which way the capitalism is creating creating division in the society, that some group of people they are controlling the capital, some of them they are out of it, they are not part of that process, they are not part of that production, not part of that, they are unable to utilizing that resources, and they are deprived from that process. So again, the contemporary conflict theorist has modified the idea of the deprivation by nothing that is the shift from absolute to relative deprivation that is significant in producing this kind of critical awareness. As Marx was talking about, the capitalism is itself in creating division in the society, and it's also creating some sort of class consciousness and critical awareness. But the contemporary conflict theorists like Dahrendorf, Coser and Collin, they are also talking about there is a shift from the critical absolute to relative deprivation, and that is significant in producing this kind of critical awareness. They argue that the absolute deprivation refers to the condition of being destitute, living well below the poverty line, where life is dictated by uncertainty over the essentials of life, particularly food, shelter and clothing. People in such a condition have neither the resources nor the willpower to become involved in the conflict and social change. That means people, those who are below poverty line, those who are unable to find food, shelter, goods, they won't develop some sort of capacity or the willpower to involve in the conflict. What the contemporary theorists are arguing about the absolute deprivation. when I'm talking about the relative deprivation, however, refers to a sense of being underprivileged relative to some other person or a group. The basis of life are not in question here. It's simple the sense that others are doing better and that we are losing out on something. So that means they are trying to analyzing themselves from others and some relatively deprived. That means they have some sort of basic resources, but they are not well equipped, they are not getting well, they are not equal amount of resources what the others are getting. These people and groups have the emotional and material resources to become involved in the conflict and social change, because these people, they are more active, and more involved in creating some sort of more critical awareness. But it is not relatively deprivation itself that motivate people. It is the shift from absolute to relative deprivation that may spark a power keg of revolt. One hand, the people who are upwardly mobile in this way have the available resources, and they may experience a sense of loss or deprivation if the economic structural changes cannot keep pace with their rising expectations. Again, if you see the conflict theory, and we can also talk about the context, what was the context, one can say the historical genealogy of the conflict theory, which way the conflict theory, historical context. The conflict theory has a long history in sociology, and without question, Karl Marx's work, now we have already discussed, I was also discussing about the Marxian position on the conflict theory. Karl Marx works in the early mid 1980s formed the initial statements of this perspective. So historically, we are whenever we are talking about conflict theory, we are focusing on the Marx work. The Marx was centrally concerned with the class and dialectics of capitalism. He argued that the capitalism would produce its own grave diggers by creating the conditions under which the class consciousness and a failing economy would come into the existence. In this juncture between structure and class-based group experience, the working class revolution would take place. So earlier in my lecture, I was talking about the dialectic relationship in between the capital in one hand and the people that are controlling the capital, as well as the working class and those who are deprived from that process. In the same way, it's a kind of what Marx is arguing, that the structure and class-based group experience and the working class revolution would take place when the people will be deprived. And again, in the early 20th century, Max Weber formulated a response to the Marx theory. The Weber saw the conflict did not overwhelmingly involve in the economy, but the state and the economy together set of conditions for conflict. So that means the Weber had a different take on that. He is saying not only the economy, but the state is also involved with that. It's also providing some sort of nourishment towards the condition for conflict. The Weber scheme is the notion of legitimation. All systems of the operation must be legitimated in order to function. Thus, legitimation is one of the critical issues in the idea of conflict. What is different, Weberian position is different from the Marx. Weber also saw that the class is more complex than Marx initially supposed, and that there are other factors that contribute to social inequality, most notably the status and the party or the power, as we have already discussed that. Again, since that time, number of efforts have combined different elements from one or both of these theorists to understand the conflicts. The three important proponents in the field of conflict theory is Louis Coser, Ralf Dahrendorf, and Ronald Collins. So now we'll extensively discuss about the contribution of Coser, Dahrendorf, and Collins. Now let's talk about the Louis Coser. Louis Coser, primarily he was born in Berlin, Germany in 1931. So Louis Coser's work is interesting for two reasons. Number one, first, he intentionally draws the majority of his theoretical ideas from George Simmel rather than Marx or Weber. So that means he was influenced by Simmelian's work, George Simmel's work. Coser in 1956 presents a number of basic propositions which have been distilled from theories of social conflict, in particular from theories of George Simmel. Number one. So that means he was influenced by the George Simmel, number one. Number two, the second reason Coser is remarkable is that he is the first to consider the functional consequences of conflicts. There's an idea of the functional consequences of the conflict other than Simmel. That is, before Simmel, conflict had been understood as a source of social change and disintegration. Simmel was the first to acknowledge that conflict is a natural and necessary part of the society. Coser brought Simmel's idea to mainstream sociology, at least in America. From that point on, Coser argues that sociologists have had to acknowledge that groups require disharmony as well as harmony, dissociation as well as association, and conflicts within them are by no means altogether destructive forces. Far from being necessarily dysfunctional, a certain degree of conflict is an essential element in the group formation and the persistence of group life. So that means, in a sense, Coser was arguing that the conflict is also functional. It's also require disharmony as well as the harmony, disassociation as well as the association, and conflict within them are by no means altogether destructive forces. Again, Coser is arguing about the functional consequences of conflict. What are the functional consequences of conflict? Coser argues that the conflict is instinctual for us. So we find it everywhere in the human society. It's omnipresent. Wherever you will go, you will find that kind of the conflict is there. That is the conflict of war, but there is also the conflict that we find in our daily lives and with our relationships. So that means everywhere is omnipresent. But Coser also argues that the conflict is different for human than for the other animals, in that our conflict can be a goal related. So that means when you have some sort of conflict, we have a specific target and the goal. So that's going to that's different from the conflict, what is completely happening among the animal to the human being. There is generally something that we are trying to achieve through conflict, and there are different possible ways for reaching our goal. In a sense, he is saying that it's functional, that we have some sort of target, you are achieving that. And again, he is also arguing about the existence of the possibility of different paths open of opportunities for negotiation and different types and labels of conflict, because Coser sees conflict as a normal and functional part of human life. So he argues it's a kind of normal and functional part of human life. He can talk about its variation in the ways that others missed, such as the level of violence and the functional consequences. He is arguing that the conflict is normal and as well as the functional. He's arguing that he is also arguing about the functional consequences. Coser makes the case of two kinds of functional consequences of conflict. Number one, the conflict that occurs within a group, and conflict that occurs outside the group. He argues that in an example of internal conflict is the tension that can exist between the indigenous people or First Nations and the national governments. That means what is happening within the system. Notice that the internal conflict is actually between or among the groups that function within the same social system. So here, within the encompassed circle, within the system, you are having some sort of internal conflict. Then again, he is also talking about external conflict. Example of the external conflict, group conflict, are the wars in which a nation may be involved itself. When considering the consequences for internal group conflict, Coser is concerned with the lower level and more frequent conflict. When explaining the consequences of the external conflict, he is thinking about more violent conflict. When he is arguing about the external conflict, he is talking about the violent conflict, is a war, conflict in between different groups, other groups. This is not happening within the system, this is happening outside the system. And the internal conflict in the larger social system as between different groups within the system. Religious hostilities creates norms for dealing with the conflict, develop lines of authority and judicial system. So again, he is also extending his boundary when he is talking about internal conflict with the large social system. This is also happening among the different groups. Coser also notes that not every internal conflict will be functional. Again, he is also arguing a different way. When he was talking about the conflict would be functional, he is saying that all the internal conflict it won't be a functional. It depends on the types of conflict and the social structure that involved. So this is necessary to understand what type of conflict is happening and which way the social structure is involved. The Coser's theory of internal conflict, those that threaten or contradict the fundamental assumptions of the group relationship and those that don't. So that means if it is not threatening the fundamental assumptions of the group relationship, that would be a functional. If it is hampering the relationship, that would be a dysfunctional. For example, let's take an example of the marriage. Marriage as an example of the group conflict over such things as household problems, it is happening. For example, within that conflict is also perennial within a marriage system. What is talking about, what is Coser is arguing, he is saying the functional. If some sort of normal conflict is happening for household activities, that is functional. But he is arguing if there is a while for example adultery or a sexual fidelity may be dysfunctional. For example, if the husband and wife they are not faithful to each other, if they are involved with the adultery or sexual fidelity, that would be a dysfunctional, and that would be lead to breakup of the group, of breakup of the family relationship. That means in a sense, in one hand he is talking about this, something is functional and something is dysfunctional. That means the what you call the fidelity, sexual fidelity and adultery, this is also dysfunctional for them. And external conflict, the different groups involved in the conflict also experiences functional result, especially when the conflict is more violent. He argues that as a group experience external conflicts, the boundaries surrounding the group become stronger. For example, in the time of the war, the members of the group they will have a greater solidarity. For example, take an example of war in between India or any other country like the Pakistan or China. When the country will go for a war, within that territory the citizens will have a stronger greater solidarity and will have a mutual sharing. That means, he argues that the Coser argues that in the time of external conflict, the boundaries surrounding the group member become stronger. The member of the group experience greater solidarity. Power is exercised more efficiently, and the group tend from the coalition with others group. The more violent and conflict is more intensified are this effect. As a group experiences conflict, these boundaries surrounding the group may become stronger and better guarded. For example, war. At the time of the war, so the group they will have a very strong sense of solidarity. So this is what he argued, this is functional. Conflict makes this function more robust. Conflict sets boundaries between groups within a social system by strengthening group consciousness and awareness of the separatedness, thus establishing the identity group within the system. So that means it's developing some sort of solidarity. Along with the stronger external boundaries, conflict enables the group to also experience higher level of internal solidarity. When group engages in conflict, the member will tend to feel a greater sense of mutual trust than during the peaceful times. They will see themselves as more part of the same family, existing for the same region. Group specific behavior and symbolic will be more closely guided. Coser argues that the conflict can have an integrated as well as disintegrating effect. Conflict functions differently, whether it is between the unrelated groups, external or inside a group, between the factional or internal. For internal conflict, the question of functionality hinges on the conflict being less violent and more frequent, not threatening the basic assumptions of the society at large, and the group having low interactional network density. Now we'll discuss about the Dahrendorf, Ralf Dahrendorf. Dahrendorf, he was also born in Hamburg, Germany on the May 1929. He clearly blends elements from the Marx and Weber. Again, he was also influenced by the Marx and Weber, and he sprinkles in elements from Coser to present a new understanding of conflict in the society. From Marx, he takes the idea of dialectical change. He was influenced. He argues that the social structure are capable of producing within themselves the element of the suppression and change. So he was also influenced by the Marxian notion of dialectical change. Dahrendorf also uses Marx's notion of political interest stemming from bipolarized social position. An example, Marx argues that the capitalism contains only two classes that really matters, the owners and the workers. These two positions are inherently antagonistic and by their nature dictates them different political interests, that is, all workers have the same politicals as do all owners. So from Marx, Dahrendorf takes the idea of the power and authority. That means one hand he has taken the idea of the dialectical idea of the antagonism, dialectic relationship in between haves and have-nots, and from the Marx to the Dahrendorf's idea of the power from Weber and idea of the power and authority. So Dahrendorf argues that rather than seeing class as a central characteristic of the modern society, Dahrendorf claims that power is the one unavoidable feature of all social relations. So for his analysis, the power is an important and central component. He argues that the power is everywhere in our social relations. So now let's talk about the power and dialectical change. Ralf Dahrendorf's theory of the power and dialectical change, he argues, like Coser, Dahrendorf sees conflict as a universally present in all human relations. But Dahrendorf does not see the inevitability of conflict as a part of human nature. He sees it rather as a normal part of how we structure the society and create the social order. So for him, that the power is also always there within the structure of the society, and power is always there with the way in which we are creating a social order. In this sense, Dahrendorf is concerned with the same issue as Talcott Pearson is talking about, how is social order achieved. However, rather than assuming collective agreement about norms, values and social positions as Parsons does, Dahrendorf argues that it is the power that both defines and enforce the guiding principle of the society. So he is absolutely different from the Parsonian position. What the Parson is talking about through the norms, values and societal will achieve the order. But he says through the power, but the power defines and enforce the guiding principle of the society. So Dahrendorf also follows Coser in talking about the level of violence and its effect, but Dahrendorf adds further variable conflict intensity. Again, in the 1957 and 559 in his work, Dahrendorf was quoting Weber defines power as the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his own will despite resistance, regardless of the basis on which their probability rests. So that means he is giving power, giving emphasis on the aspect of power. Dahrendorf also makes the distinction along with Weber between the power and authority. For him, power is something that can be exercised at any moment in all social relations and depends mostly on the personality of the individual involved. Because of its universal characteristic, Dahrendorf calls power as a factual. It is the fact of human life. So he's visualizing that the power is everywhere within the social relations, and it's also depend upon the personality of the individual involved, the which way the people are utilizing that power. However, like Weber, Dahrendorf is more interested in authority than this kind of factual power. So for him, authority is a form of power, of course, but it is legitimate power. It is the power that is always associated with social positions or roles. So for a sense, that authority is also connected with the power structure. If somebody is holding a particular positions, he has some sort of authority, he is also in that power relationship, he will dictate something, he will control something, so and so forth. So authority is the part of social organization, not individual personality. So here then he is creating some sort of demarcation line, that's the individual personality is something different from the authority. Somebody is holding some sort of authorities, they have some sort of responsibility to execute some plan and policy, so and so forth. Dahrendorf creates authority. The legitimate use of power is found in the status positions, role and norms of the organization. Now again he is connecting with the status positions, role and norms of the society with the power. And again the Dahrendorf refers to authoritative social relations as the imperatively coordinated association, ICAS. So this is the his own word. He has developed this idea, imperatively coordinated associations, what called authoritative social relations. What he is arguing means, if something is imperative, it is binding and compulsory, you must do it. So that means norms, and if you are an employee of a particular organization, you have to do that. You have to do certain things as per the requirement of the organization, the rules and regulations. Again, so the term simply says that social relations are managed through legitimated power or authority. The social relations is managed by the legitimate power and authority, while the term is straightforward, it is also important because it is interconnected with each other. Again, the Dahrendorf in 1968 recognizes that continuity is without a doubt one of the fundamental puzzles of social life, but argues that the social order is the result of constraint rather than some consensus around the social beliefs. Here he is clearly arguing that we don't have any sort of consensus in the society. We'll always will find some kind of constraint. It's a division, it's a conflict. In the constraint approach, the norms and values of the society are established and imposed through authoritative power. That means somebody is imposing some sort of value which is not who has some sort of authoritative power. So that means it's not on the consensus, it's through the constraint. So you can see some sort of constraint. Some group of people, they are creating some kind of values and establish some sort of norms, and they are imposing that norms on others. The Dahrendorf argues with the Durkheim and Parson that society is created through roles, norms and values, but he argues that they work through power rather than collective consciousness. Here one can also see how the Dahrendorf's position is different from the Durkheim and Parson's position. What the structural functionalists are talking about, like the Durkheim and Weber, that will have some sort of collective consciousness, but they are saying it's not about the collective consciousness, it's all about the power. We are establishing the norms, values and roles through the power structure rather than collective consciousness. Here is where we can see the primary distinction between the functional and conflict theory approaches. And the functionalist assumes some kind of cultural agreement and don't see power as the central social factor. In contrast, conflict theorist argues that the power is the central feature of society. So that's a demarcation line, the distinction in between the structuralist and as well as the structural functionalist as well as the conflict theorist. That the conflict theorist that's focusing on consensus and cultural agreement, where the conflict theorists they are primarily arguing about what you call the conflict, and the power is the central feature in the society. Further, as the conflict theorist, Dahrendorf says that the substance of the social rules, norms, status, positions, values and so forth may be explained in terms of the interest and powerful person. That means people, those who are powerful, those who are controlling the system, they are also controlling the values, and this is they are operating everything through the power structure. Like Marx, Dahrendorf argues that the culture of any society reflects the interest of the powerful elite and not the political interest of the middle or lower class. Like Marx, Dahrendorf also arguing very strongly that the culture of any society reflects the interest of the powerful elite and not the political interest of the middle class or the lower class. That means the people, those who are controlling, those who are willing, they are deciding what kind of norm would be, what would be the rules and regulations, so and so forth. It is also important note that Dahrendorf sees class as related more to the power than money or occupation. So the class is very much interconnected with the power relationships. Now, in his argument, conditions for the conflict group formation, he argues that is three important conflicting situations. One is technical, political and social conditions. When it's technical conditions, he is arguing that there are those things without which groups simply cannot function. When he is trying to analyze the idea of the power relationships or the conflicting situations, he is saying that in terms of the technical conditions are those things without which a group simply cannot function. They are the things that actually define the social group as compared as to an aggregate. So that means the group dynamics, group relationships, the group ethics, ethos, that's determined by the technical conditions. The technical conditions includes members' ideologies, what Dahrendorf called the charter and norms. So that means the technical conditions like ideas and ideologies are very, very important for Dahrendorf to understand the conflict. The member that Dahrendorf has in mind are the people who are active in the organization of the group, and the political conditions refers specifically to the ability to meet and organize. That means the people, when the political condition is saying that some sort of group they have some kind of technical conditions, that technical conditions facilitating towards the political conditions, and they will form a group and organize. The third, the social conditions of organization must also be met. There are two elements here in the social conditions, is that communication and structural pattern of recruitment, which is also it's very obvious within any organization. Through this model, one can also analyze different kind of social movements and a different kind of conflicting movement which is happening around the world. So when he's talking about communication and the structural pattern of the recruitment, obviously the more people or the quasi groups are able to communicate, more likely they will be form a social group. So through the communication process, they will form the group, they will be very active. The group ability to communicate, of course, is central to the Marx view of class consciousness. It's as similar with the Marxian class consciousness. Again, Karl Marx, of course, was aware of some communication technology such as printing and newspaper, but still saw all bringing people together in the physical proximity was necessary for communication. But Dahrendorf, writing in 1950s, saw even more technological development than did Marx, and now we have seen this condition fully blossom over the advent of the computer technology and the internet. So one can also further argue is that Dahrendorf is very much arguing about the communication and the proximity communication in between the members of the society, very important for any kind of movement or any kind of group formation. The second part of Dahrendorf's social conditions also sets a limit on communication. He is also critical about the communication process. He argues the social connections that people make must be structurally predictable for an interest group to develop. He is saying that the internet communication, as an example, initially when the internet communication was developed, the known people, they are communicating with each other. He argues when the email and the internet first began, there are the few mechanisms that pattern the way people got in touch with one another. People would email their friends or business acquaintances, and in the sense computer technology only enhanced already established social connections. So that means it's not allowing other people to be part of that, but nevertheless, but with the advent of the search engines like Google and websites like Yahoo, there are now structural features of the internet that can more predictable bring people together, particularly through the social media. So now the different kind of social movements has got a different kind of shape, has taken a new position, where the people, they are inviting others, they are participating through the social media, blogging, so and so forth. So now social media is providing a kind of platform where the other people, they are part of that, they are participating in the group formation, so and so forth. What the Dahrendorf is also arguing about that. Dahrendorf argues that underlying all social order are imperatively coordinated, associated. So ICAs, what he is arguing, are organizational group based on different power relations, and these ICAs set of latent power interest between those who have it and those who don't. This interest will tend to become manifest when a group meets the technical, political and social conditions of the group organization. Conflict generated between interest groups varies by intensity and violence. The intensity of the conflict is a negative function for a group organization and social mobility, and the positive function for the association among the scarcity resources within the society. The more intense conflict are, the more profound are the structural changes. This was the position of Dahrendorf's, and he is also talking about the social change involved shift in the personnel of ICAs. The new personnel impose their own hierarchy of status, positions, role, norms and values which set up another grouping of ICAs and later power interest. Now let's talk about Randall Collins' idea of conflict. He was born in Knoxville, Tennessee in July 1941. His idea, he was much more influenced by Blumer and Goffman, and he was also oriented towards the Parsonian project. Collins draw on work of Weber, Durkheim and Goffman to argue that symbolic goods and emotional solidarity are among the main weapon used in conflict. He is emphasizing on more symbolic and emotional solidarity, and he was doing some sort of micro level analysis. The micro level orientation is a unique and powerful addition to the conflict perspective. The most other conflict theories are oriented towards macro level. So that's the difference between Collins' argument as well as the Coser and Dahrendorf's. Collins is more macro analysis. He's a macrocentric. He is talking about macrocentric social relationship. In a microcentric social relationship, the others were talking about macro level analysis. So for him, the stratification is generally understood as operating through oppressive structures that limit access and choices, what he called the idea of glass ceiling. You are creating a division, you are creating a glass ceiling, and the power is conceived of a working coercive through the control of material resources and method of social control. So that means here he is also arguing in a similar manner with the Marx, that you have created a glass ceiling and the power is conceived in a coercive work, and through that you are controlling the material, you are also controlling you have a mechanism to do the social control. Collins also attunes to us to a different level of analysis than either Coser or Dahrendorf, the global level of geopolitics, where the political conflict are analyzed within the context of history and geography. This is the speciality about the Collins, where he is talking about geopolitical conflict. In his book, he advocates the what you call the conflict theory, sociology. He advocates the development of the scientific sociology in which sociological research and theory move towards the construction of generalized explanatory theories. By explanatory, Collins means that these theories should be able to prove the conditions under which certain events will or will not occur in the form of statable statements. By generalized, it means that the Collins refer to theories of social dynamics that are applicable to all subfields within sociology, and he argues that the stratification and organization constitute this explanatory core in the field, influenced by interactionists such as Goffman. Collins grounds his theories in everyday life experience of individuals whose pattern interactions maintain these social relations. In a sense, he is talking about two things. One is the explanatory idea and as well as the generalized idea, where he was influenced by the Goffman idea of everyday life experiences of individual and everyday life interaction of the individual. So, arguing that, he has four important points in conflict sociology. Firstly, he is arguing about, which is the main idea to understand different kind of conflict within the different societies. Unequal distribution of the each scarcity resources produces potential conflict between those who control it and those who won't. Like one can also argue about the developmental model. Through the developmental model, some people is controlling that, some resources, and some people they are not part of that. So that means unequal distribution would be an important determinant to understand the idea of conflict. Dahrendorf argues that there is one primary resource in the society, that is power. Again, he is also following the same line in which the Dahrendorf was also talking about, and Collins is also talking about. Randall Collins, on the other hand, follows the basic outline that Weber gives us, the three different types of scarcity resources. Dahrendorf's idea was something on power, but he is focusing on the three important resources. Number one, economic resources, power resources, and cultural resources. Here, that's the difference in between Dahrendorf as well as the Collins. Collins' idea is the economic is an important factor, power is also important factor, and cultural resources is an important factor. In the economic resources, which may be broadly understood as the material conditions, he is saying that the material conditions of the individual. Power resources, which are best understood as the social positions which control or organizational network. And third, cultural resources, which Collins understand as control over the rituals that produces solidarity and group symbols. So that means three things are important for him. And second point, he is arguing about the potential conflicts become actual conflict to the degree that opposing group become mobilized. That means there are at least two main regions of resource mobilization that are involved in emotional, moral, and symbolic mobilization. As I was also talking about, he was analyzing the micro-sociology, the symbols, morals, emotions that also involved to mobilize the people. The prime ingredient here is collective rituals. That is one of the Collins' main contribution to the conflict theory. That means the people, they have some sort of emotional sharing, moral responsibility, and symbolic mobilization, which is creating a collective rituals. The group don't simply need material goods to wage in battle. There are also clear emotional and symbolic goods used in conflict. So that means he is arguing that it's not only the material war, it's also very emotional kind of thing which is mobilizing the people, and symbolic goods which is also mobilizing the people for conflict. The third idea what he is talking about, the conflict endanger subsequent conflict. In order to activate the potential conflict, parties must have to some sense of moral rightness, and that means the kind of political conflict, you have to have a moral authority, moral rightness to mobilize the people and in a positive sense. Fourthly, conflicts diminish as resource for mobilization are used up. Just as there are two main regions of conflict mobilization, there are two fronts where the demobilization occur. For instance, conflict emotional resources tend to be important in short run, but in the long run material resources are the key factor. So that means he is talking about the emotional resources is it's for the short run, but the material resources is important are the key factor for mobilizing people for a long run. Many times the outcome of the war is determined by the relevance balance of resources. Collins gives us two corollaries to understand that. The first is that middler or sporadic form of conflict tend to go on for longer period of time than more intense war. Fewer resources are used, that they are more easily renewed. This is one reason why terrorism and guerrilla warfare tend to be go on almost indefinite. What he is arguing that if you have a resources mobilization, that the sporadic form of conflict tend to go on the longer period of the time than the more intense one. The sporadic form, limited one, so that then immediately renewed that resources. So that for the terrorism and guerrilla warfare tend to go on the almost indefinite period, and civil rights and relatively peaceful political movements can be carried out for the extended period as well. It's for a short period. And again, the last analysis of Collins, the geopolitical theory, Collins also constructed geopolitical theory of state breakdown by elaborating and formalizing Weber's theory of geopolitics. In his theory, Collins applies Weber's definition of the state as an organization with a monopoly of coercive power within the territory. So he is arguing about the monopoly and coercive power of the territory. He asserts that the states with resource advantage and favorable geopolitical positions, where the state does not border with military strong enemy states and enjoy natural barriers for the defense, are most likely to win the wars. So that's the important idea by the Collins. And Collins also attributes to understand the rise of capitalism by highlighting Weber's institutional model. She argues that Collins argues that it is not the Protestant ethics per se, but disciplines circulating economic ethics often emphasized in monastic life that brought about rise of capitalism in the society. More important, however, was the presence of the legal and economic institution that facilitate the emergence of the market of commodity, labor, land and capital, and encourage entrepreneurial activities. Collins further argues that both in medieval Europe and Japan, these conditions came together through the economic activities of the large monasteries, and hence is able to show that capitalist growth flourished independently in Asia. So according to the Collins, in order to conflict to become covert, people must become mobilized through the material resources for organizing, and they must be emotionally motivated and sustained, feel more justification and be symbolically focused and united. Once conflict begins, it tends to be reproduced itself through ritualized exchanges of atrocities. The back and forth exchange of atrocities reproduce and boost emotional motivation and moral justification, and it creates further representative symbols for additional ritual performances. After a time, conflict are won or lost primarily as two different kind of resources as gained or lost. As I was talking about, you have a symbolic resources and you can renewing that very soon. And the other defining feature of the nation state is territory, and territory, like legitimacy, crisis its own set of influences, specifically the heartland and marshland advantages. Heartland advantages concern material resources, natural resources, population size and tax base. Marshland advantage is an effect of national boundaries and the number of distance for enemy territory. The key variation in the geopolitical theory is over-expansion, a condition where a nation overextended its reach materially, supporting armies too far from the heartland, and culturally controlling the diverse population. So, after discussing that, we will have to talk about the criticism of conflict theory. Though the conflict theory has immensely contributed towards understand the social relationship, we have some sort of criticism. Lots of criticism is also is there for conflict theory. The conflict theory has been criticized on various grounds. For example, it has been attacked for ignoring the order and stability, what the structural functionalism were talking about. The critical theory or the conflict theory have also been criticized. Conflict theory has been also criticized for being ideologically radical. So, this is critical cultural conflict theory is ideologically very radical. The conflict seems to be emerged mysteriously from legitimate system, and the conflict theory seems to be suffer from many of same conceptual and ideological problems. So, this is all about the conflict theory. We have briefly discussed about the conflict theory and about the conflict theory. Different contributors like Coser, Collins, and Dahrendorf's idea of the conflict theory. Thank you very much.
So, if somebody wants to explain the contemporary issues through the conflict theory, they need to keep into the mind all these theorist perspective, and especially because these are the mainly on a status, class, and power. That is a Western notion of the sort of the concept.
Yeah.
If they want to explain the social issues in India, will they apply in the same mode? We need a variation, a shift, and if that shift or the variation, what could be that?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. As we have seen, I will cover all the three conflict theorists like the Coser, Dahrendorf, and Collins. If you see, by and large, in many ways, they are talking about status, power, and party and authority, so on and so forth, and inequality of resources. Per se, for example, if you see in the India, as we are visualizing, many problems is happening in terms of the accessibility or utilization of resources and scarcity of resources, and some group of people, they are utilizing the resources, some of them they are getting some sort of benefit out of it, and you can also see some sort of movement is also happening. You see the movement in terms of you can see the caste movement, the land reform movement, you can see the nocturnal movement, you can also see different kind of movement is also happening in different way. If you are trying to understand all these movements, the conflict perspective would be a very interesting perspective, would be a very interesting perspective for us. Through that, you can also understand the way in which the power is operating within system, within the this particular system, the way in which the different kind of authority is utilized, the way in which different kind of resources has been utilized.
Okay. So, well friends, certainly we need a certain kind of modification if you want to explain the Indian society with under this perspective or this theory, which is called conflict theory. And with this word we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on behalf I thank Dr. Manoj Jaina for giving such a wonderful lecture on this very topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amarjit. Thank you very much.